This is the latest iteration of CityLit's termly creative writing night of reading. We've got 12 brilliant readers, and we've also got an interview with the poet Stephanie Sy-Quia coming up. This may also be the final online iteration of Late Lines. Fingers crossed next term we might be heading back into person with this. My name's Thomas McMullan. I'm a writer. I'm also a tutor and coordinator with CityLit. I'll be guiding things along today. But as I say, we've got 12 brilliant readers. So without further ado, we'll start with the first of which is Josh Hallam with Spanish Woman with Grey Background. Josh, over to you.
Hi, thanks for the introduction. Trust that people can hear me. And I'm currently in the storeroom at work on a break, so I won't be able to be too long. But yeah, I'll start going. So it's called Spanish Woman with Grey Background. Grow up as she could. The images I have of her, I formed with my hands out of this land. The earth that she was born on, during that summer heat that took half of the flock and her mother on the birthbed. Then I put the images to fire to keep perfect, knowing they will belong on shelves on these walls when I am meat for the wolves and mites and dust again. I heard she was in Madrid now, living in the new way, old enough to marry, but she wouldn't have. I write that into her eyes, soft with the scalpel each time, half the size of her head, like when she would ride on my knees to the fiesta, the fruit pressings, the things that used to be enough. I leave nothing but terracotta for when she returns to mourn. I hope I have done her and her mother's beauty proud. Thanks very much.
No, thank you, Josh. Brilliant, brilliant, really beautiful poem. Leave nothing but terracotta. Love that. And thank you for doing it in a store cupboard as well. I think extra points for doing it in the middle of the work shifts. Thank you very much, Josh. Coming up next, we've got Nathan Tipping. Nathan, over to you.
Hey, good evening, everyone. Hope everyone can hear me clearly. So very brief introduction. This is just the start of the introduction to a short story I am writing. So I'll get started. Behind the house, half hidden by the rosemary bush, is the cabin. Coated in moss and ivy, it appears as much a part of the garden as the willow or the grass. Each night, the frost creeps between the gaps in the floorboards and spreads its icy tendrils up the walls. Acorn sleeps badly on nights like these. She never tells me this, of course, but it's obvious. 3 layers of blankets is no substitute for a proper winter coat. Most rabbits are made for winter. Each season they molt, lose their summer coat, and grow a dense layer of fur that leaves them impervious to the cold. But this year, Acorn's coat has grown thin and wiry. Not that she ever complains. During my 9 o'clock visits, timed so that it is suitably dark outside, but not so late as to arouse the neighbour's suspicion, she talks about anything and everything. I'll find her sitting in pitch darkness, her bulbous eyes catching the faintest glimpse of light from outside. I'd buy her candles, but they're so expensive nowadays, and they'd only raise questions from the neighbours anyway. Even as she sits huddled under her blankets and shivering, she talks about everything but the cold. What she's had for lunch, politics, what she's read in the weekend's Guardian. Recently, she's been working her way through the classics. Moby Dick, Of Mice and Men, Watership Down, that sort of thing. It's hard to tell whether she particularly enjoys reading them. Her main source of satisfaction appears to be hunting through the second-hand copies I bring her for errors. A misplaced comma here, a missing letter there. Carelessly placed semicolons are always fair game. Just a few weeks ago, after a particularly bitter spill, I realized that I could barely open the cabin door. The wood was already warped with age, and now the latest spell of frost appeared to have edged its way into the lock. When I finally barged my way inside, conscious that I could well have drawn the neighbour's prying eyes, I couldn't help but broach the subject with Acorn. Perhaps she wants another blanket, or as long as we've got coal in the house, I could bring her a hot water bottle. A hot water bottle, she asked in mock outrage, wisps of breath escaping from the corners of her mouth. Why, it's basically tropical in here. I wouldn't need a hot water bottle unless it was cold, would I? Part of me was relieved. Blankets, hot water bottles, hot water for that matter, have become hard to get hold of these past few months. Either way, my questions had set her on edge. Her beady eyes narrowed. Her whiskers twitched. Her ears swiveled independently like a pair of satellites trying to catch barely perceptible signals. For the first few weeks that we knew each other, she'd been so wary of me that she barely spoke. Even now, every question I ask is invariably met with suspicion. For a rare moment, she appeared lost for words. I'm not overstaying my welcome, am I? She asked. All traces of sarcasm had vanished from her voice. Before I could answer, her ears shot up straight. Someone's at the door. I scurried back down the garden, through the house, and to the front door. 2 officers stood on the doorstep, a ferret and a very dashing fox. Neither of them looked familiar. Good evening, ma'am, said the fox. We've had reports of a rabbit in the area. Probably nonsense. You know what some of these old biddies, getting themselves all worked up about nothing alike. But thought we'd better do the rounds and ask about, just in case. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Nathan. I really love the line, carelessly placed semicolons, a fair game. Yeah, got to kill some of those semicolons, and brilliant. And mysterious animals aplenty. Thank you, Nathan. Coming up next is Hilary Thomas with Like Two Lost Souls at Sea. Hilary, over to you.
Thank you. Yeah, I wrote this in a flash fiction weekend course with Maria Thomas. And yeah, it's called Two Lost Souls at Sea. I never wanted the thing. My daughter brought it home. I don't know what she was thinking. Company, she said. It's a help with your recovery. Well, I don't know how she came to that. I mean, I could barely look after myself. My legs were ever so weak after the accident. Ruddy thing would be constantly in and out around my ankles like a skipping rope. Truth is, when my Don passed on, I lost the will to, well, she called him Fred. After your childhood dog, she said. It's a ruddy cat, not a dog, I said. When I were a bit stronger on my feet, she moved out. I told her, take Fred with you. No, she said. It's his home. He loves you. Only because I feed the ruddy thing, I said. He went off that packet stuff soon after she left. One taste of a real bit of salmon, and that were it. He wouldn't eat anything else. Well, you only live once, don't you? I said, Fred, you'll eat me out of house and home, you will. Of course, he just carried on eating, didn't he? I wouldn't have it any other way. Whenever she called, it were always, can't stop long, ma'am, just off to work. Or, remember the time zones? Well, what's she ruddy call for? When he died, I were ever so lost. She came back for the funeral. Her youngest, John, he dug the hole. He's buried under the tree. We used to sit there in the summer afternoons, under its weeping branches, him at my feet or in my lap. Fred, I used to say, we're like two lost souls at sea, you and me. He'd look up at me with such doleful eyes. I told my daughter, I shall miss him terribly. I know, she said. Thank you.
Well, thank you very much, Hilary. Really beautiful piece. I really love that. Coming up next, we've got Andrew Cox with Piloting a New Best Practice in Social Care. Andrew, over to you.
Piloting a new best practice in social care. That leads a tripping hazard, said the cute, soft toy panda, smiling supportively. Although Jill was carrying baby Carol in one arm and holding a plate of food in her free hand, she managed to reach out with her toe and flip the carpet back over the trailing wire. Thank you, that's better, said the panda, smiling kindly. Jill slumped onto the sofa and, cradling the baby in one arm, started to eat. There hadn't been time before. In fact, it was the first time that morning she'd had a chance even to sit down. Billy was doing his imitation of a robotic Mars miner. It seemed to be his favourite role model from school at the moment. Jill tried to smile encouragingly while concentrating on eating. The panda applauded loudly. Very good, Billy. What do you think, Mother? It said. Fortunately, Billy settled to drawing robot armies with his crayons, and at last everything was quiet. Is the sun getting in beautiful little Carol's eyes? Perhaps you should pull the curtain, said the panda, smiling in a very loving way. I think it's all right, said Jill. Well, there was a case last year, the little one getting retinal damage from extended exposure to direct sunlight. I'm sending you a link to a paper about this, Scott et al. 2021. The risk levels are low, but the data's there. Perhaps you want to look at table 3, said the panda. It smiled in a gentle way. Jill placed the baby down carefully on the cushion next to her, put her plate of food on the floor, got up and pulled the curtain across a little, and sat down again. Just as she picked up her plate again, the panda said, would you like to check lovely Carol is comfortable? I have, said Jill. The panda looked at Jill kindly, and there was a pause of several seconds while it seemed to be weighing up this answer. Have you checked that our Carol is dry? My senses suggest the baby's fine, and please don't call my child our Carol. I'm sorry, I learned the phrase from you. You used the expression 4 times yesterday and twice the day before. We like to reinforce positive naming practices to improve young mothers' well-being and strengthen the bond between parent and child. Smith and Bacon, 2018. Is that right? The panda nodded kindly. Yes, we do. I can explain more of social services policy if you like. I think you'd find it interesting. We're very committed to your welfare as a family. It's my baby. Yes, I'm so happy to hear the strength of that statement. Would you like to say more about what you feel for the beautiful baby called Carol? I would like that very much. Jill placed her hand on the panda. Jill, should I be concerned? You're not feeling depressed, are you? If you are, I'd be happy to chat to you about your feelings. I wouldn't be making any judgments about how you feel, but of course, the children's welfare is paramount. The panda smiled in a supportive way to back up this important affirmative message. Social services had to retrieve their parenting aid and neglect defence automata, PANDA for short, from the waste disposal. When the operatives lifted the lid of the hatch, they could hear the panda's muffled voice far below, advising that the recycling bay was not hygienic or secure, backing up the point with appropriate references. This in itself, to quote the peer-reviewed publication arising from this pilot study, Jones, Dangling and Wearison, 2035, demonstrated the resilience of the device's material design and the adaptability of its intelligence to unexpected contexts. The text continues. Subsequent analysis of retrieved data showed that the device had performed successfully at statistically significant levels for accurate advice, use of evidence, and deployment of both verbal and non-verbal communication strategies. The authors are optimistic and conclude thus. Indeed, we look forward to a time when a panda will be a respected and loved member of every family unit.
Thank you very much, Andrew, with your sinister surveillance panda. It reminded me of Little Eyes by Samantha Schweblin, which is a great novel if anyone's looking to buy a new novel. Excellent. And coming up next, we've got Missy Billy D. Lewis with My Heart Stood Still.
Hello. Hi, thank you very much. So I'd just like to thank Sarah Wardle, because I'm in her class at the moment, writing poetry, and it's been really inspiring. So I've got a poem called My Heart Stood Still, and it's 1 and 2. So it's been inspired, actually, the second one by Sarah Wardle. First one is My Heart Stood Still, Spread the News. My heart stood still when I heard the news. A voice within said, spread the news. You were born to win, not born to lose. It's a key to life, then gratitude. Soft and gently I reply, without a hitch and without a sigh. I was born to win, not born to lose. The voice within said, spread the news. Listen up, people. Here I am to spread the news. Come on, people. You were born to win, not born to lose. Check it out, people. I heard the key to life is gratitude. I ask you, did your heart stand still? I ask you, did you hear the news? To win, to lose, which do you choose? To win or lose is a state of mind. Do you choose to win? Do you choose to lose? To win or lose, stand up or snooze. One step forward, stand still and chill, or stay behind. Stay motivated, keep smiling, and still be kind. Ah, my heart stood still when I heard the news. A voice within said, spread the news. I was born to win, not born to lose. Hey, what do you think about gratitude? We were born to win. Come on, people, not born to lose. Boo-hoo, you snooze. You choose, win or lose. It's up to me and it's up to you. Uh-oh, my heart stood still when I heard the news. Which do you choose? Will you spread the news? The key to life is gratitude. Come on, people, help me spread the news. That's the first one. The second one is My Heart Stood Still, spread the news, win or lose. My heart stood still when I heard the news. A voice within said, spread the news. We were born to win, not born to lose. Is the key to life then gratitude? Listen up, people. Whatever your views, are you going to hit snooze or choose to get up and out and execute? Ask your body, mind to move. Don't sit in silence, put up with abuse, but light the fire, ignite the fuse. I'm telling you, I've seen the signs. What will you do to free your mind? Your soul deserves better times. Don't be miserable, whine and pine. Let's start reading between the lines. Free happiness from the chains that bind. If we keep on trying, we will find ways to break out, not to be confined. Stand still and chill. Stay behind or keep smiling and be kind. Softly, gently, I hear a reply, without a hitch and without a sigh, a wounded soul who's passing by. You lead and I'll walk by your side. I was born to win, not born to lose. My voice within said, spread the news. I heard the key to life is gratitude. I don't know what else to do. Another punching bag, alone and confused, mentally and physically misused. My heart stood still. You heard encouraging news. What a blessing. Come on, let's spread the news. To win or lose is a state of mind. You choose to win, thus leave losing behind. This is your moment to rise and shine. Leave the shadow, glow, and darkness outside. Raise your game with vibrational pride. It's about time you smile and laugh from the inside out without having to gasp. Finally, you win at last. Come on, people. Let's join hands, create a new wave, the winning streak towards better days. I told you I see the signs. It's time to make a stand to all mankind. No more pain and suffering at the hands of those who choose wrongdoings. Release the bondage and the heavy chains that mar, jar, scar, and manipulate against peace's sake. Hey, what do you think about gratitude? I'm telling you, I see the signs. Will you join me and free your mind? Better times await your soul and bind the ego and need to control. Your subconscious speaks within your conscious mind. Embrace pleasure and release the strings that tie. Keep knocking on doors and the one will open wide. One step towards action in motion, real time. Focus and persist. Sit back or resist. Or never give up and quit. You pick. Boo-hoo to those who choose to stop beating hearts from hearing the news. They snooze and so too they lose. My eyes cannot unsee the visions I have seen by joining hands. We rebuild new chains, ones that uplift out of darker days, helping those who need a hand to raise their voice in their internal silent land. It's up to me and it's up to you. Will you help me spread the news? The key to life is gratitude. Bless you. Thank you.
Oh, yeah, I got you. Thank you very much, Missy. Felt that in my spine. That was brilliant. Thank you very, very much. We're going to have a 5-minute break now, as we're about halfway through the readings. So we'll come back at 7 o'clock. But thank you very much for everyone that has read in the first half, and yeah, looking forward to the second half, and hope you all in the audience come back. See you soon. Okay, hope you're all doing well. We're going to kick off with our second set of readers, starting off with Lakshmi Jamdagni, who's going to read The Postcard. Lakshmi, over to you.
Hello, thank you. I wrote the story of my gap year many years ago as a story some months ago. Then when I came back to it, I realized I'd missed a bit out. And when I thought about it, I decided it needed its own space. So this is a true story, standalone short story called The Postcard. It was 1972 and I'd taken a gap year. I was 18, Brenda was 25. Teaching her was one of the best bits, despite it feeling strange in some ways. For a start, I'd taken my education for granted. It was something I just had to do, no way out. But all of a sudden, I had been given the status of a teacher on my volunteer placement at St Hilda's East Settlement in Bethnal Green. It felt an undeserved privilege and honour. A better feeling even than getting paid for all the temp jobs I'd been doing in the past year. The most bizarre aspect was that I came from an Indian immigrant family, yet I was teaching an English person to read and write in their own language. Brenda had left school at 14. She just stopped going. Her mum didn't mind, as she needed her to go out to work as soon as possible, like she had done. So almost effortlessly, she slipped into a job as an assembly line worker locally. No writing necessary. Hand-eye coordination skills trumped that. If her signature was required, her boss obliged. Now her motivation was spurred by her 2-year-old son. He's got to look up to me so I can help him with his homework. I can't fail him. Neither could I fail her. But to be honest, this challenge was a welcome distraction for me at the time. My student had signed up to take literacy lessons. She'd regretted the fact that she had hid from her teacher whenever she could. Of course, the more she hid, the further she slid. That's when the cover-up had begun. Her teacher couldn't catch her up with her classmates, and anyway, he saw her destiny as a worker in one of the local factories. So why bother trying? Later, she'd married Dave, a lorry driver. He'd also left school without being able to read and write. He couldn't see the point. He only ever wanted to be a driver. His gaffer dealt with any paperwork for him, colluding with the pretense. And so Brenda and Dave had each other to sustain their cozy cover-up. 3 months and 12 sessions. Emotional, apologetic, keen, proud. My name is Brenda. My son's name is Paul. We live on the Cranbrook estate. I work in a factory. Mum works there too. My son loves chips. My husband leaves home at 6 in the morning. I want to be a good mother for my boy. I don't like my boss. Sometimes he gives me sweets. My son needs new shoes. Excuse me, what does this say? After the first few sessions, her shy, distant gaze disappeared. She would greet me with an open smile instead of a look of shame and embarrassment. My long-awaited holiday to Wales was just before I was due to go to uni. I told Brenda that I would send her a postcard. Thank you, I love it. I'm going to treasure it, she said, beaming when we met for our final session. My heart went out to her, and I felt so proud of us. It was the first thing she'd been able to read. My drafting and redrafting had paid off. I didn't want her to struggle with the meaning, but to get it straight away. I decided to stick to what she was probably expecting to hear. Having a good time. It's lovely and sunny here. See you soon. Instead of family tragedy. Mum's had a breakdown. Worried about Dad. Can't enjoy holiday. That was my cover-up. She didn't need to know that my grandmother had died and that this had led to my mother's breakdown, that she had been sectioned and was in Claybury Hospital, or that I was doing my best to enjoy my break, but everything was happening in a blur, that I didn't know what I would be returning home to, that I was wondering how Dad really had been coping and what lay behind his "I'm okay" every time I'd rung home. I remember the friend I went on holiday with, but nothing about what we did, when, or where. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Lakshmi, and really powerful reading, very powerfully read. Thank you very much. Coming up next, we have Eloise Munch with The Proposal. Eloise, over to you.
Great, thank you. So this is a short story. I think I wrote it about a year ago, and it's slightly based on a story my dad once told me about how he proposed to my mum in an argument, but the characters in it have nothing to do with my parents. So here we go, The Proposal. For all the money Simon threw at the occasion, it still managed to be a monumental cock-up. He'd planned a spectacular evening, booking the kind of restaurant that laid out cutlery for each course. He envisaged the two of them warmed by candlelight and looking out over tumbling white mountains. Halfway through a bottle of red, he would have turned to his beloved and said, "Ruth, darling, it's been 4 years now. It's time I make an honest woman out of you." She would laugh and roll her eyes before noticing the plush ring box surreptitiously placed on the table. There'll be tears, squeals of delight, a complimentary bottle of champagne. The giddy pair would ski back down the mountain together for obligatory phone calls and, most crucially, a night of newly engaged passion. In reality, he accidentally pulled the ring out with his gloves in the ski lift. 5 of them were squished into the rickety gondola. Simon, Ruth, and an odd Dutch family who were eating liver pate sandwiches. Father of the brood was the kind of man that accompanied every action he made with an unnecessary noise. His breathing sounded like he had a whistle hidden up his nose. He was grunting with thunderous appreciation for the liver pate. He even let out a triumphant fart when getting into the gondola before chuckling to himself like it was some kind of private joke. His wife, by contrast, was sour and silent, picking at her sandwich like a ravaged pigeon. She wore a fuck-off facial expression that had immediately intimidated Ruth, a rather thin-skinned and sensitive creature. Their cherub of a son had a steady stream of snot falling out his nose. They filled the small pod with their perspiring bodies and pungent smell of liver pate. A muddle of poles, skis, and rucksacks lay all around them, and now, in the middle of this disarray, was a clumsily exposed wedding ring. "Simon, my God, that's not what I think it is," Ruth whispered through gritted teeth. She leant forward in an effort to create the illusion of a private conversation between them. I don't know. What do you think it is?" he answered in a hushed tone, also attempting to lean in, but finding it rather difficult under so many layers. "You weren't going to propose, were you?" she hissed, her intense stare drilling into him expectantly. Ruth was a fawn of a woman with large eyes that hogged most of her face. Before this holiday, she spent £250 valiantly getting her hair cut into feathers in an effort to interject some personality into her style. The feathers were currently sticking out at odd angles due to the hat she'd been taking on and off all day, making her look a little bit like a hyena. "Well, not right now, I wasn't," he mumbled, a creeping feeling of embarrassment rising from within. Simon was a strawberry blonde man. He blushed a lot and he burnt a lot, and those are the 2 most distinguishable things about him. "Lekker, huh?" chived the jovial Dutch man. He made a jabbing motion towards the distant mountain range. Ruth and Simon breezily nodded at him before looking back at each other with venom. I can't believe this, Ruth quietly began. You know how much I hate skiing. You know I didn't want to come on this bloody holiday in the first place. And you thought this would be the perfect place to ask me the most important question of our entire relationship. Despite the years of anecdotal evidence that should have prepared Simon for this reaction, he still felt a familiar thud of disappointment. The Dutch lady's ski was jabbing into his side and he was wearing far too many clothes for the insulated pod. His face was going beetroot the way it always did when he found a situation uncomfortable. The first time Ruth had ever seen the beetroot blush was after Simon had cheated on her at university with a large-footed lacrosse player. Ruth felt a well-known pang of regret. All Simon cared about was skiing and horse racing. Ruth could not ski and neither was she a racehorse. After 10 years together, this was still the sad fact of their relationship. All right, calm down. We don't need to get engaged now. Fine, he babbled. If he says one more thing about me not giving skiing enough of a chance, Ruth thought to herself, I'm just going to absolutely lose it. You just haven't really tried, Ruth. With skiing, I mean. You haven't given this holiday a chance. I spent all my commission getting us here and you just aren't. Simon, she snapped at him before remembering where she was. The Dutch man looked to them both and let out a weird warbling laugh. The noise ricocheted off the side of the pod and his wife joined in with a snigger. The boy opened a large pate-filled mouth and also began to cackle, delighted that his parents were taking so much enjoyment in the drama. Before Simon and Ruth knew it, the family beside them were in uncontrollable fits of giggles. The man kept slapping his knee in a way that made the whole pod swing disconcertingly. In an effort to appear the ever-happy couple, Ruth and Simon found themselves attempting to join in. Smiles plastered to their faces, they both forced out staccatos of fake laughter, large grating sounds until Ruth broke down into violent, uncontrollable sobs. Oh, complained the Dutch man while his wife bundled Ruth into an awkward embrace. Simon sighed and dropped to his knees, crawling towards his sobbing heap of a girlfriend. The gondola made a juddering sound as the mountaintop came into view. Ruth, I'm sorry I messed this up. I wish I'd waited until the fondue. But you're just going to have to tell me now. Please, will you marry me? Thank you.
No, thank you, Eloise. That was brilliant. I love the snot, farts, and liver pate I've written down here. But yeah, I really, really love it. Great voices as well. Excellent. So coming up next, we've got Damien Robin with Ode to Osip Mandelstam. Damien, over to you.
Thank you, Tom. Great to be here. Yeah, I wrote this poem before taking Stephen Winfield's class on Mandelstam and Akhmatova, the two Russian poets from the Stalin era of the Soviet Union. And the historical, literary and photographic detail that Stephen used was tremendous, and I recommend his classes highly. I've been researching the Chinese Communist Party and know many people in the UK who can't go back to China because they're Falun Gong practitioners. And many of them have been tortured, and many of them know people have been killed, and their relatives are back there. They're pressurized to make them stop practicing here. So as well as Falun Gong, there are Uyghurs, House Christians, dissidents, and Tibetans in the UK who are similarly repressed. And Falun Gong is the largest group in China because their practice is healthy, and because their practice is healthy and improves the body, they're the go-to group for organ extraction as a means of genocide. So while I was researching this, I found the Victims of Communism project, which deals with the global communism and its attempted genocides throughout time, or throughout their time anyway. And this helped put Mandelstam in context. Because he had deep roots in Russian folklore and history, because he was there before the Communist Party arrived. So in fantasy, I refer to this sort of maybe his sort of connection to Russia in the second stanza of his ode, and the third stanza touches on how his childhood fears may have related to ghouls and ghosts of Russian tradition, and in the last stanza it's alluding to his dying on the way to the gulags. And I say that his childhood frights were nothing compared to the physical damage and the pervasive threat brought on by communism. So here's the poem. Ode to Osip Mandelstam. Oh, Ossip, throw your jangled words like diamonds splashed from smashing glass. You're shivering with bare-backed birds who ice up each outward pass of wind through Stalin's drubbing lips, from lungs that breathe on fingertips and cannot warm, for his stale breath is turning slow to moveless stone, a statue fit for after death, soon draped with guano bombed by birds, whose blood-tipped feathers have all blown. A woman flows in blue felt dress, embroidery of peasant class, with white lace crocheted coronet, entwines through miles of dappled path, where cogent smiling memories press to gift plucked birds from snag and net, from bullets and shaved aftermath. Bear points of patterned homegrown peace and share the harvested release, the berries juiced from next year's drinks, the flurried cherry blossomed pinks. Oh, how you yearn, O Mandelstam, for innocence that's hugged and saved, where you would glide through childhood paved in walks wide skied in simpleness, to homes where darkness, horrors clam, was but the shutting out of ghouls, whose threats are tied and never fresh, and seldom rend man's molecules, are weak at base and cannot mess with boys and girls of flesh. For ghosts and ghouls bend down to cosmic rules, unlike chilled Stalin's collared fools, who swing the lead of torture tools to lop the heads and cross the minds of those with thoughts of awkward kinds, not to change the things they say, more to keep them out the way, until forgotten, missing, lost, en route to lands of labored frost, where truth's resilience persists, and human fluid bursts and mists beneath the fists of communists. I hope that was understandable how I read it. Thank you.
No, thank you very much, Damien, for the road. Thank you. Coming up next, we have Hamira Patel with Gold. Hamira, over to you.
Thank you, Thomas. Hi, hi everyone. I hope you'll enjoy my short story. It's still a work in progress, and it's based on some things I witnessed when I worked with refugees. Gold. He carried the 2 heavy-duty bottles along with his backpack, all while his frail-looking younger sister, her brownish hair in a state of disarray, clutched his forearm. They had arrived. They were across the border. The land looked the same. The air, however, felt different. The soldiers and aid workers were positioned, waiting to receive those like him. Refugees, Laji'ain, a new label, a state unknown to him. Muhammad looked out at the scene before him, a couple of large flimsy tents thrashing in the biting wind, a sizable van positioned with tables set up in front, where warm clothes were being distributed by aid workers, and foreign soldiers scattered across different posts, patrolling their areas, foreign to him, but not foreign to the land on which he now stood. With no clue of what was next, he approached his mother, who had finished showing their documents to a soldier nearby. A trill of laughter struck his ears as he saw a huddle of privates examining a sniper rifle. His attention returned to mother. "What now?" he asked. Solemnly, she shook her head. "Nothing to do but to wait. We will be taken somewhere else." "Where?" he pressed. "Muhammad, I'm not sure. We just have to have patience," his mother responded, the folds of her hijab flapping as a sweeping gust of wind rushed through the air. Amal, his sister, who was barely 5 years old, peered up at him. He could tell she was hungry. The passage they'd taken to freedom had been a strenuous one. It was not over yet. Apart from each other, the items he carried and those held by his mother were the only things they had left. But they were finally away from a dangerous future, heading instead towards a new one elsewhere. Muhammad scanned his surroundings once again. There seemed to be no food available for them. Begrudgingly, at the foot of the tent, he dropped the 2 large drums and unpacked his back, drawing out a plastic bag. In it were a few pieces of khubz, the bread he would buy fresh every morning from the bakery across the street, its yeasty smell wafting through the window of their home. Digging deeper, he pulled out a small jar containing a mixture of thyme, sesame seeds, salt, and sumac, the last of the fragrant za'atar made by his beloved grandmother. He sprinkled a pinch of it into a plastic Tupperware, then stood up and reached for one of the bottles he had placed on the ground. Opening its lid, he lifted it and gently poured out a thin stream of green liquid gold, their most prized possession. It swilled into the Tupperware, mixing with the za'atar, emitting a fruity yet bitter smell. Muhammad tenderly sealed the bottle shut. Amal sat beside him as he dipped the bread into the Tupperware and handed it over to her, the oil trickling down the piece of bread. "I miss our olive tree." It was the first sentence she'd uttered in weeks. Thank you all for listening.
No, thank you very much, Amira. I love the description of green liquid gold. Beautiful, thank you. And our final reading before we move on to our guest today is Urf Opik with Brian Cured. Over to you.
Hello, thank you. So this poem came out of the classes I've been doing with Christina Dunhill. Brine cured. Memories salted with eye water, layered like Baltic sprats in a tin, will last for years if left undisturbed, gathering dust at the back of a larder. Layered like Baltic sprats in a tin, frantic days are pressed into ordinary years to gather dust at the back of a larder, hidden treasures for a provisional future. Frantic days are pressed into ordinary years, and gradually grief transforms treasures hidden for a provisional future into a living present. Gradually, grief transforms. Shriveled losses blossom into a living present, unfolding new hopes like paper flowers. Shriveled losses can blossom and transform over years if held and observed, unfolding new hopes like paper flowers from memories salted with eye water. Thank you.
Oh, amazing images. Thank you very much, Urf Opik. Which we're now going to move on to our guest, which is Stephanie Sy-Quia. I'm just going to read a brief introduction, and then Stephanie will give us a reading, and then we'll have a little interview. If you also wanted to ask questions during any of this, do post them in the chat, and we'll try and pick up on them as well. So Stephanie Sy-Quia was born in 1995 in California and now lives in London. She studied English at Oxford and currently works as a freelance journalist. Her writing has appeared in the FT Weekend, the TLS, The Economist, The Spectator, and Tank magazine, and has twice been shortlisted for the FT Bodley Head Essay Prize. Released towards the end of last year as Amnion with Granta, and I believe you are going to be reading from this today, Stephanie. So if you are there, I will pass over to you.
Hello. It was such a privilege to hear the work that I was able to hear since I joined. So thank you so much for sharing it and for welcoming me into this space of yours. I also want to apologize to my fellow panelists that I was absent at the sound check. I've been traveling for the past couple of days and have just been very scatty with details like that. So anyway, I indeed will be reading from Amnion, which is actually matching my shirt. This is a complete coincidence. And this book is the result of a very long writing period, but is basically sort of about my family history, which is quite complicated. I'm going to, I don't know how long you'd like me to read for, but given that the readings varied a fair bit in length, I'm going to sort of read a sort of page and a half, and then we'll see. Okay.
Yeah, that's great. That's brilliant. Yeah, thanks, Stephanie.
Yeah, we'll see where we stand. So I don't think you need any context for this other than the fact that the wall I'm referring to is the Berlin Wall, and my mother grew up in West Germany. When the wall fell, my mother was 21, and she cried because this was the end of the world as she had always known it. In the place where I grew up, there were horses, thighs moving like nudity under their fur. The pigeons are clattering into the heights now. In the British Museum, there are shards of horse. In the British Museum, there is a blind lion. My grandfather collected lions. Empires are like milk teeth. They fall. It is only in European epistemologies that the desert, or the jungle, or the Dragon Bay is configured as a void, and therefore the backdrop for the single blanching passion, as per Moon Tiger, out of Africa, Indochine. And of my mother's birth and the doctor's darker hands, why did I make mention? These are the tropes that gape, fleeing the high Gothic. When my father got tuberculosis, they drained the water from his lungs so he wouldn't drown inside himself. The water had been rising in him for 21 years, in and out of pale love and a stepfather. I saw the stepfather once. He was creased and putting French fries in his mouth. My father steered us away with hands on our backs. My parents married and afterwards ate grapes. The Home Office posted someone to their corner to watch that in their goings out and in their comings in, they were together, and at nights. Of my parents' early loving, I rightfully know little. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Stephanie, for that reading. So I just wanted to start us off with a quote I found actually in the review of this of Amnion in The Guardian, and it says that you excavate private life and public arenas with the dexterity and precision of a genealogical investigator. And Granta, your publisher, describes you as having the eye of an archivist. And I was just wondering what you've thought of these ideas of an investigator and an archivist, and whether it fit in with your own idea of your practice. Is that how you see yourself, I guess, your project?
It is. I think there's an interesting tension between, for me, the kind of curatorial practice of a museum like the British Museum, which figures quite prominently in the book, because I think that museums like the British Museum or the Pergamon in Berlin, or these big national museums that sort of get set up in the 19th century and have a bit of everything, whether that's like looted Egyptian treasure or Benin bronzes or the Parthenon marbles or whatever. That basic curatorial practice is kind of the genteel face of a pillaging instinct. And so I wanted to really hold in either hand, really, the idea of, am I entitled to write about these things? Is writing about them an act of pillage? Or am I archiving? And is that, a sort of an act of like devotion towards my family history and an act of honoring and homage? And I don't really think I've resolved a question either way. I think it's important to hold the two in tension and to acknowledge that it's a fine line and you can kind of wander on either side of it.
And that idea of line I find really interesting in the book, because there's this idea of lineage constantly like in question, and you know, that tension in some ways between lineage as a line and lineage as this assembly of things, and that seems to be really present, I think, at least in the book. And I was really interested with Beowulf actually in the how that kind of factors in the poem and how it's described. I think so begins the first story in our language, and I just thought it was really interesting, that kind of tension there between a kind of national identity and a story of national identity, and then coming into tension some of, I guess, the family identity and lineage of family. But it'd be great to know a little bit about how you felt you negotiated that tension between, I guess, memoir and the idea of, you know, cause and effect and a kind of line being drawn between things, and something that resists that. Is that, I mean, how did you kind of find that tension there?
Well, I think there's a difference between trying to tell the truth and trying to honor the truth. And I think, unfortunately, when you're writing about your family, you can only ever aspire to honor the truth. Because, you know, one thing I did do is I sent the manuscript. An agent was already talking to me and interested in representing me, but I said, I can't show you the main thing I've been working on until I get my family's blessing to pursue it. So it was basically finished, and I sent it to my family with a big, you know, sort of health warning of like, some of this stuff you will find shocking or, you know, difficult, or it may, you know, contravene your version of events. But, you know, and of course, I want you to tell me if you feel that this my version has, but I'm not really interested in minor factual inaccuracies. I'm interested in kind of what you feel to be harmful and profound mishandlings of the truth. And you know, basically, very luckily, my whole family said, you know, yes, like, go for it, which was really beautiful and profound. But I think that that's just a fundamental adjustment you have to make, and you have to try and approach these things compassionately. And of course, you know, as soon as you open it up, you do get, I was told about a lot of the minor factual inaccuracies, even after I had said, like, I'm less interested in those. But that was actually, I think, an important lesson, because that was actually a very tacit way for my grandmothers in particular to be like, you got this, and this wrong, i.e. like, this happened in Hanover and not Hamburg or whatever. But basically, like, you do have our blessing and go for it. And as I say, that was like one of the most beautiful kind of exchanges I've had with either of my grandmothers. And then to your point about lineage, I think, you know, my family history is very complicated, and it has some really major fractures where the line has been broken. And so I wanted to kind of take each little shard and, to the best of my ability, kind of like label it up and lay it out in a kind of logical way. But I'm not trying to piece it all together into something new. It's like, it is an archive drawer of like, well, here's this little bit, and then here's this bit, and hopefully the kind of aerial view is a pleasing one.
Yeah, and that's a beautiful image, the archive drawer. And I guess maybe the book as an archive drawer in some way, or a series of drawers. How did it come about? I mean, it'd be great to know a little bit about your process, I guess, in terms of, you know, kind of creating a book-length poem. Was that always the project, or did it kind of come about through kind of smaller pieces that felt like they belonged together?
It was definitely smaller pieces. I think because I started writing this when I was 15, so my frame of reference was not what it is now. And so I started writing it, and I didn't really have a word for what it was I was doing, because I hadn't read any texts like it. And then as I got older and I began to kind of fill in some gaps in my frame of reference, I thought, oh, you know, yes, it's like, I very much see myself like operating in a similar place as Maggie Nelson or Eduardo Galeano. I mean, Maggie Nelson is like super cerebral, so maybe more like Blewett's, you know, her idea of kind of numbered propositions and stuff. And Amnion was, every stanza was numbered, actually. This is probably quite an interesting detail.
Yeah.
Until very, very late in the day, until I was in discussion with Rachel Allen at Granter, and she said, you know, actually, I'm not getting this whole numbered thing. And I said, oh, you know, I want it to kind of be a reference to, you know, the archive drawer, you know, when the fragment is numbered up and it says, you know, found in, you know, the Fertile Crescent in 1810 or whatever. Yeah. And she said, I think that this is scaffolding that you've had for this project for many, many years, and now it's time to take the scaffolding away. which I thought was a really fruitful way of thinking about it, and allows you to be incredibly self-forgiving, I think, throughout your whole process. So yeah, get yourself some scaffolding and then just lift it out at the last minute, and it's actually a very liberating process.
And how do you feel about it now? So now having had some months since it's been out, do you feel that? I mean, Rachel's a brilliant editor, I'm sure, and it's the choice. And it seems like very good advice. But looking at it now, how do you feel without that scaffolding? Did it feel like scaffolding, or does it feel like structural stuff that you would want?
No, it feels like scaffolding. I think if I'm really honest, I mean, like, obviously, I think the books turned out really beautifully. One of the reasons that they were numbered for me was that I really liked the idea of each numbered section being on a new page, which would have made for a much fatter book. So like there was just a very practical consideration as to why that did not end up like being the finished product. But I think I was very, very struck by Anne Carson's translations of Sappho, and the kind of like the visual presence of the fragment on the page, and the idea that you kind of have this like the cumulative effect of all this sort of like flotsam of text that has arrived at us, sort of worn through, all the ravages of time. And I really love that idea, that sort of worn smooth quality of the ancient text and of the fragment. And I wanted Amiens to have something of that, which I think it does. It's just the visual impression is slightly different in the finished book.
And I think scaffolding is a very interesting image, given how central it feels like structure, like architecture is to the book. I think the kind of introduction, there's this brilliant comparison. I mean, Amiens, and also there's this kind of biological structure that these seems to be in tension. And the introduction is it's spandrels that you're talking about, both in terms of it's a kind of spandrel in terms of church, shoulders in part and arch, spandrel biology, that which has not arisen from fear, as I think things that are passed on, isn't it? It's certain kind of traits evolutionarily. And I was just wondering, it'd be great to hear a little bit about that, how, I guess that tension, or that those two things in conversation, that kind of interest in architecture and structure, Canterbury Cathedral is also very kind of central to the book. And that kind of biological idea of structure, and the title, this kind of amniotic sac, as it were. I guess it's just maybe even just in that idea of a spandrel. I guess what is it that drew you to that?
Yeah, I think it's funny because the names of the parts of the book are definitely sort of, I think I had quite a magpie-ish imagination when I was structuring the book, and I wanted Amiens to have a very interesting superstructure. Like all the poetry books that I love the most take the concept album approach rather than the like accumulated hits. So I was always very interested in the superstructure, but I definitely kind of found words and phrases that I really liked, and I thought, okay, well, those have to be the titles of parts, and spandrels was one of them, because so I studied English literature, and one of my best friends is a biologist, and she told me that a spandrel is a biological trait which has no evolutionary advantage. So it's sort of a byproduct of natural, not national, selection. And I thought that was actually a perfect term for, so much of the book is about kinship systems which lie outside of basically the transferal of material wealth, i.e. like paternity and patriarchy as it stands in our society and in our world as we currently know it. And so, because I have so many amazing, like, strong women who've had to face really, really adverse situations over their lives, and I wanted to honor them and, the friendships that sustained them through those horrible times in their lives. Friendship is something which goes so unsanctified in our society. And so as looking at a spandrel as a sort of something that arises without an obvious reason, I found a very fruitful way of thinking about how you can acknowledge and honor the things which go unhonored and unacknowledged, insufficiently acknowledged in our society.
Oh, that's really lovely. Thank you. That's and I'm kind of, that made me think about just, I guess, that you mentioned compassion earlier, but this idea of sharing the text with family to get a blessing before, I think that's is that something that you do more widely in your practice? Is that, I guess, is that something that you felt was important with this particular book, or is the idea of family and that sense of signing off in some ways?
Yeah, I mean, it's an interesting one because my practice has been pretty inextricable from this particular book the whole time I've been writing. So ask me again in 5 years' time, when hopefully I'll have another book to show for myself. But I mean, so I'm working on a novel, which is about my next project is that I'm working on a novel about my maternal grandparents. So one thing I didn't read about in that extract I just read, but which is very like prominent in the opening section of Amnion, is that my grandfather was a Catholic priest. And it's sort of, you know, just like delineated very simply, but I would like to write a novel that is really about that whole process of them meeting and falling in love. And, you know, none of us know what actually happened. He's long dead, and my grandmother is, you know, obviously just going to take it to her grave. And that's the other thing about family secrets. I think, like, you shouldn't, my practice would never involve sitting a family member down and trying to get the story out of them. You know, with Amnion, I operated in the kind of open source material of our family, of anecdotes that had been readily relinquished. I mean, I'm sure my family were a bit taken aback to see like quite how much attention I'd been paying over the years when I said, you know, here's my manuscript, give me your blessing. Or I mean, I don't really know what I would have done if they'd said no. That was something I was going to think about if it did happen. Luckily it didn't.
Sorry about that. Yeah.
But yeah. And so I think, I do think that as a culture, in our cultural climate, and these things are starting to change, but I think we do have this cult of the writer being entitled to everything. And with issues of like writing about other cultures, that is changing a lot. And I think, you know, for the better. But of course, you know, that's the sort of sphere of entitlement is retracting, presumably to the family. And it's not that I won't continue to write about my family, but I think that there are compassionate and honest ways you can go about that practice with your family members, which is, you know, for me, an ongoing project. I haven't really figured out like precisely what my MO is with that, but it's just something that I bear in mind. Because on the one hand, you know, your family history is yours, it does belong to you, but on the other hand, it's completely enmeshed with your siblings and your grandmothers and your, you know, and there are parts of the history that may be news to other members of your family, and I think you have to be careful about that. And, you know, ultimately my book came from a place of love, and it dealt in some very hard truths, which, like, you know, has resulted in some kind of major conversations with other family members. So buckle yourself in for that, if that's what you're heading, you know, signing yourself up for, and your family. Yeah.
And also, I guess, leaving space for things not to be answered. I mean, it's interesting there you're talking about your grandfather's story and how, and nobody actually knows what happens, which I find a really interesting start to the fact you're writing a novel. You know? And then I guess it's interesting. You also work as a journalist, so that mode of kind of journalistic inquiry and trying to kind of uncover, I guess, stories, and then also then it sounds like you're quite comfortable in some ways with leaving certain stories unanswered, or certain, you know, voids within a person's life, and that feels like a really interesting, again, tension there. I don't know, is that I mean, maybe you could speak a little bit about that idea of leaving holes, or maybe within Amnion, the idea of leaving gaps and things that aren't connected or you know, aren't explained.
Yeah, I mean, thank you. That's a question I have wanted to explore for a while now. It's very important to me to leave gaps because, so a hard example, as in a, you know, a tangible example, is that my dad was very abused by his stepfather when he was younger. And I know no details of that abuse. I mean, he's never talked about it. And I mean, it's not as if there's silence around the topic, like we know that there was abuse. But I do think that, you know, I've gotten this far in life and he's never told me about it. So I'm not expecting him to sort of sit me down on my, you know, if he didn't sit me down on my 21st birthday, well, that would have been a horrible way to spend a birthday. But, you know, if it wasn't a sort of major rite of passage, then it's not going to happen. And like, people who have survived horrendous ordeals do not owe you the details of those ordeals. And this is very, very important to me, because I do think that we live in a culture where the powers that be demand writers from marginalized groups or people who've had horrific experiences to put a finer and finer point on detailing those experiences, but sort of for the like consumption of the status quo, you know, for people to read in their leisure time. And I have a hard time with that, because, you know, I should be able to sort of just like delineate the void that the abuse occupies, and for that to be sufficient. I'm not going to sit my dad down and pry the details out of him if he hasn't told me already. That's something that I couldn't do in good conscience, and I don't think would be a very responsible thing to do. And so I think it's very important, but that's the other thing, you know, it's very important to leave spaces for doubt and the vague and, you know, negative capability. That's, and, you know, I'm a freelance journalist, but overwhelmingly what I do is criticism. And of course, the whole practice of criticism is you identify something that you have seen in the kind of weft of a text, and you pull it through and you make your argument, but you do so in full knowledge that there are going to be other people with other interpretations who see other things. And it's the coexistence of all of those interpretations that makes the work we do so fruitful. And, you know, it renews your commitment to just kind of being more conscious in public life. You know, it has wider ramifications, and I believe that very, very sincerely. And I could yak on about it for ages and be very earnest about it. So best to stop there.
No. No, similarly, I could talk to you for a while about it. It's very interesting I'm very interested, just very briefly, but interested in ideas of, I guess, the void and silence. My dad's a physicist, and he always reminds me, I guess, a vacuum isn't nothing, but it's a kind of potential. And I think that's always very useful for criticism. It's kind of that space of maximum potentiality in some ways of those gaps. But anyway, yes. So the question I wanted to ask you is, you said in an email that you think you're a bit anti-discipline in your writing, and I was just wondering what you meant by that. And I guess then just a little bit about your process. And as you say, I guess it's very tied to this particular book, but how you kind of see that process of writing poetry for you.
Well, again, the process of writing poetry for me is inextricable from this book, because this book represents all the poetry I've ever written, really. So yeah, we'll see. For me, this book, I mean, you mentioned earlier the prominence of kind of cathedrals and cathedral structures, and especially Canterbury Cathedral. So I went to the Cathedral School of Canterbury, which meant that I spent a lot of time wandering around old medieval buildings, and, you know, going to church every day in one of the not every day, every week, in one of the most important religious structures in the UK, which has this, you know, very, very charged history. And I was a young girl, and a lot of these you know, this was a school that had sort of only just gone co-ed in the kind of, I think 15 years prior to my arrival. So it was really, really recent. And it was founded in 595 AD. So it's the oldest school in the UK. Like, that's a long time for it to have been an institution that was like, education is not for women. And so, you know, my experience of kind of girlhood, pubescent girlhood, and kind of inhabiting this body that a lot of people had a lot of opinions on and wanted to control in one way or another, was intimately tied to wandering around the kind of physical manifestations of, you know, just institutionalized power and strength. And, you know, wandering around these stone buildings and these structures that basically said, you know, we're not for you, we don't want your kind, like, you're not really allowed in. And Amiens, also the prosody of it was I mean, they occupied like every second thought of mine for 9 years. And I was writing it all the time, which meant that I was writing it when I was like chopping a vegetable, brushing my teeth, but most of the time when I was walking. And so the prosody of it is really, really informed by walking, but also because I did so much walking in stone structures. So the specific kind of acoustics of your body as it moves in these kind of vast stone spaces. So whether that's like the nave of a cathedral, or, you know, across flagstones or in cloisters or whatever. And so I was quite interested in the acoustics and the heft that your body walking through a space is given by the fact that the space is made of stone, and stone as a building material just communicates like the investiture, the investment, being very invested in an ideology. You know, you can look around like central London and all the stone buildings are dedicated to like one creed or another. And or any city anywhere. Sorry, what was the rest of your question about?
Well, it's about this idea of an anti-discipline.
Oh yeah.
What you meant by that.
So yes, I think the other thing was that precisely because this project began when I didn't have the frame of reference to have other texts to look to, I sort of felt as if I was stumbling around a bit for a long, long time. And I was also, I found unusual things inspiring. So another, well, not unusual, but things which were outside of a lineage of writing and of text making. So one of my other bugbears, and I guess it's not so much anti-discipline as just wanting to think about practice and influence and discipline in a much more kind of lateral way, and in a much more generous and playful way, because I'm a big fan of sort of irreverence, is to think, you know, not which texts inspire you most, but like, if you're a writer, then I would love to hear which photographers really inspire you, or which, you know, I'm interviewing a whole bunch of people on like the art I go back to for a piece that I'm guest editing. And the slot is normally for poets I go back to, but I wanted to ask, you know, a range of people who aren't necessarily poets, like what inspires you? So, you know, I've spoken to a poet who is really inspired by video games, and like I find that really exciting and really joyful. So I think definitely find what gives you a sense of play and joy, because that's where inspiration can be really, really exciting and really fun. And also another one of my bugbears, and this I suppose is where I'm anti-discipline, is just rest. Like I'm a really big fan of, you know, just resting, and like what oh god, I'm blanking on her name, who wrote I May Destroy You, Cohen.
Yes, yeah.
Well, what she said about like going Michaela Cohen, yeah, thank you. Sorry. Yeah. What she said about going into the silence, I think is a really, really good point. And just, you know, let the fields of the mind lie fallow after a project, because if you work too hard, like you'll just get soil erosion up there, and that's a pretty bad problem to have to solve. So like take quiet time, and don't feel bad about not really coming back unless you have something to say. And if you don't have anything to say for a long time, then that's also okay.
Brilliant. Thank you, Stephanie. So I'm just going to open it to questions from the audience now. One of which actually I've got here. This person would love you to talk a little bit about your journey to publication as a poet. What would you recommend that poets do to get their work published?
I don't know if I'm the best person to ask, to be honest, because I have been extraordinarily lucky and I've had a lot of help. But one thing that I, not actually for my poetry, but just in general have found really wonderful is I am one of the Ledbury Poetry Critics, which is a network of poetry critics of colour around the UK, but they've got sister programs in Ireland and the US now. Basically trying to augment the number of poetry critics of color there are out there, because, you know, our critical establishment is a bit pale, male and stale. And that is mutually impoverishing for our kind of literary culture. But what I have derived from that network of people is just the company of really amazing, brilliant, inspiring people. So it really gets me kind of inspired and enthusiastic and energized about writing. And it's just a support network. So, you know, you don't have to find a critics network. You could find a writer's room. I mean, you're in one right now, and that's really wonderful. So well done. And then in terms of my path to publication, it's not the best answer really, because I was at a party and I met someone who said, oh, you know, you're a young writer. Have you been looking for agents yet? I know one. And he sort of introduced me to the person who is now my agent. And of course, when you meet agents, it's good to be working on something because, you know, you have to be able to show them something. And I was working on this and he said, I really want to see it. And actually through the Ledbury critics, I had met Sarah Howe, the poet. And I had also, my sending the manuscript to my agent was contingent not only on sending it to my family, but sending it to her. I wanted her feedback to say, you know, do I let this shrivel away in a drawer or do I continue with it? And very fortunately for me, she said, no, you should pursue it. So, you know, it sounds awful. And when people said this to me, it made me cringe and it still makes me cringe. But, you know, networking really does go a very long way. Yeah. But I mean, otherwise, I would look for writers doing things at a really grassroots level. A friend of mine, Nina Minya Powell's, is incredibly successful, but she started out making, and still does, you know, making tiny zines and stuff. So really commit to finding small presses and building relationships with them. And, you know, I think that's the more traditional route for a lot of people is, you know, you come out with a pamphlet and then you move on and so on and so forth.
Fantastic. Thank you, Stephanie. Another question here, which actually I wanted to know as well, actually turning, I guess, your, you mentioned there kind of artists that inspire you. So I'd maybe particularly an idea, you mentioned a sense of play. I'd be really curious on artists, whether they're visual artists, ideally not poets, but some type of other artist that maybe inspires you along the lines of a sense of play.
Yeah, so okay, so one artist I really love is David Kindersley, who's a stone cutter. And he's sort of this generation of kind of artisans who were basically trained in medieval, actually, I'm not sure if he was, but anyway, they were sort of trained in quite an old-fashioned letter cutting tradition in the aftermath of the Second World War, or in the sort of interwar period, they all got really into letter cutting. But then in the aftermath of the Second World War, they found lots of employment because their letter cutting skills were required on all sorts of buildings that had been damaged in the Blitz. But that's where you really see this very, very reinvigorated kind of letter cutting tradition in the UK, and all that kind of beautiful mid-century calligraphy.
Yeah.
So if you go around, you know, any church, really, any major church, there'll be a plaque that was made in the past 70 years that will have like a very, very beautiful take on the Roman alphabet. But David Kindersley especially, you know, he was really playful in how he combined the letters of words. So he would kind of combine an O and an F, and you would still be able to read it as of without any difficulty. But he would really play with how like your eye would move around a piece of text and compacting things and elongating things and hyphenating things in interesting places, and would really kind of make you think about the arrangement of letters, like so language at this really molecular, modular level. And that's really thrilling to me. Other visual artists I like, or any artists, I guess. Oh, well, I love Edward Weston and Imogen Cunningham. So, you know, Edward Weston, You've probably seen his picture of a pepper that is like this close up of a pepper, but it looks like the naked back of a man. It's very sexy. And he has another one that's like a piece of, it's a cabbage leaf, but it looks as if it's sort of drapery from a marble statue or something. And so that kind of visual punning, I think, is really, really delightful. Things that make you look twice and try and reconsider what it is you're looking at.
Yeah, well, also nicely tying it back to your book, but those ideas of kind of biological structures and kind of stone structures, and that the body and then a pepper, and kind of combining the two is really, really interesting. But thank you very much, Stephanie. I think we'll have to leave it there because we're at 8 o'clock now. But thank you very much. That was really, really, really interesting to hear you read, and thank you for answering those questions. And thank you to everyone that spoke tonight. Really brilliant set of readings, and I hope you all have a lovely rest of your evening and a nice weekend, and hopefully see you all again soon. So when I click this, it very just like cuts the cord. So goodbye.
Thank you very much.
Bye. See you. Bye.